So if I'm doing this correctly, we are live right now. And this would be Friday, September the 5th, 2025. This is Infinite Plane Radio. We can potentially do open phones, but the audio quality might be questionable because I would be blasting it off of the laptop. So we're going to stick to the bare minimum. I could turn on my camera, but I would look like a raccoon raiding a trash can in an alley. Like, it's really dark in here, and I have all my art supplies behind me. And I think my eyes might reflect red or kind of green. I don't know. It's like it might be off-putting. Go ahead and jump into chat. We're live on YouTube and X. So I lit up Restream rather. So Restream comments won't show up live, unfortunately. I like Restream. I'm sorry, not Restream, Odyssey. Odyssey doesn't get retweeted, but they are there. And there we go. Good. Chat is active. So I really just want to catch up. I've been working on a project, like I've been talking about, the book. And to fine-tune the book, going through something and reading it isn't always enough. What I like to do is listen to it. So I'll copy and paste chapters into a text-to-speech. So when I listen to it, I might catch things that visually I miss, like exiting versus existing. So it's kind of easy to miss things, even if you're using AI. And so I listened to the whole thing and I decided, I'm going to take these audio files and I'm just, instead of using something generic, I'll find something better and I'll produce these chapters into videos and upload it as a series. So the title of the series, the IPS Deprogram, A Skeptic's Guide to the Theater of Psy-War, is really just the chapters of this book put into video format. I plan to have the rest of the videos up over the weekend. And as far as the book itself, I'm still juggling a couple of different titles. And I want to put a lot of graphics in there because the things that we're talking about are kind of out of the box, difficult to conceptualize. And if you have a visual aid, and the infographics rendered by ChatGPT are top notch. Like, I'm totally pro AI. I don't know if that makes me anti-human, but it's like, this is better than a graphic designer, better than an editor. There are so many things that it just does better. I'm just waiting for AI to go ahead and replace, fast food workers. So let me make sure my audio is on. I know that we generally start out with a lot of bumps in the road. I think last time we restarted like 7 times. And then we'll catch up. But I've been busily hacking away at this project and fine-tuning my process for video editing, streamlining it, where I know pretty much how long it's going to take to produce videos now. And I have projects in the works, for example, the Newsbenders clips. But the voiceover stuff, the narrator stuff, is something that I've barely worked on. And now that I'm using it, I'm very impressed. In fact, someone asked me, they recommended a very specific voice because someone had said, I'd rather hear it in your voice, a real human, instead of AI. And my response was really that what I'm, in fact, is to meet the expectations of the YouTube marketplace as far as this genre of content, which I'm positioning it outside of conspiracy theories, because that's what we're not, but I'm putting it specifically into the area of philosophy, because that's where it belongs. If you think about what we're doing and how we're looking at systems and the world stage as a model, conceptual model, and a framework through which we interpret things, we're not in the realm of conspiracy theories or bizarre conjecture about reptilians or blood drinking elites or fake koala bears and whatever else people are happily spreading. You know, the chemtrail people have jumped the shark. It's unbelievable. I've been saying for months now that if you're a chem boofer, I don't want to see you flying, because you could say the pilots don't know that they're killing Mother Earth with chemtrails. You could suggest that maybe they don't know what's in the fuel. But if you believe in this chemtrail stuff, you have no business flying. Even if there is an international chemtrail believer conference, you better drive. Because if you're flying and you're aware of it, you're now complicit. You're putting gas in the gas chamber. You're a horrible person. Everyone else has plausible deniability. They're ignorant. They're innocent. My point is, Naomi Wolf, Dr. Naomi Wolf, was showing how on her ticket she was especially like, I guess, scrutinized for what she was showing off her ticket. She flew around somewhere, and I'm thinking, this is one of the biggest chemtrail pushers out there. Why is she flying in an airplane? Like, she's a monster. Am I right? Like, there's no excuse there. Like, I know that this flight is dumping poisons on everybody below me, causing floods, manipulating the weather, sterile people, and towers trying to ignite it, burning away our atmosphere. It doesn't make any sense to me. If anything, they should be protesting. If every single chemtrail believer wasn't a hypocrite, then if they protested flying and said, I'm not going to fly, that thing is spreading death, maybe people would take them seriously. I've been trying to help them. I'm like, if you really believe this stuff, wear a mask. If people ask, why are you wearing a mask? Why are your pets wearing a mask? Oh, it's because of the stuff the plane is spraying. Because then at least it shows that you believe your crap. But if you're going to fly in an airplane, you don't believe it. Like, just stop it already. All right, joined by Ollie Goering, Travel C, Thirst for Truth. Thanks for joining. Yeah, we're going to, very soon, the next big move here is the moon base. I have found the IPS moon base better than the previous headquarters. And the focus this time will be a nightly scheduled program, or deprogram rather. That way it's easy for me to schedule it. I can actually make routine, pre-scheduled posts and promotion, and consistency will also build up the number of people in the tank. And we want to get back into the routine of taking calls. But this time, I want to have a little bit of quality control on the calls. And I want to lay down some ground rules, because I feel like oftentimes, I think I was kind of withholding a little bit out of politeness, which is, of course, fine, because we want people to be encouraged to speak their minds. But we also have to watch for not trolls necessarily, but letting certain things bypass our critical filters. For example, lately, I've been really thinking about this simulation stuff pretty hard, because I've been impacted by simulation theorists. Like, I remember people talking about slamming the door on Jehovah's Witnesses and how invasive these religious people are pushing their religion. But I really felt it with these simulationists. It was worse than Scientologists. But what finally clicked with me, and this was only like within the last couple of days, it really, really clicked, is that the reason why it's irritated me is that we're having a conversation about the news and how propaganda infuses the news and how it lines up with entertainment, and how there's this amalgamation of perspectives and views and content that creates our zeitgeist, that our history is being manufactured. And pointing this out, the simulation people would try to take over the conversation and say, no, man couldn't possibly do that. It must be the simulation. And we gave it a pass because it sounds scientific. And you're like, oh, double slit experiment, Schrodinger's cat, 100 monkey syndrome, or the 100th monkey effect. So you're like, okay, they have a point, because simulation theory is somehow scientific. But I'm like, well, who really promotes simulation theory other than Tyson, Joe Rogan, and I guess another big pusher of it would be Elon Musk. So it's like, okay, this is obviously endorsed by the deep state, by the PSYOP entertainment complex. The same people that brought you the pandemic are pushing this whole new paradigm, and it includes this God construct. So my point is, every time we let the simulation premise be inserted into a conversation, you're essentially letting somebody insert a God construct. And I'm saying that's not really fair, or rather, it's not intellectually tenable. You can't let that get a pass. So if someone says, oh no, there's no way that the news could be scripted in advance, God's doing it. There's no way that James Cameron's predictive programming in Terminator 2 and the Titanic had anything to do with his presence at the literal Titanic on 9/11. Those are synchronicities. That's a higher power. That's the simulation. That's God. So they're inserting higher powers, the divine fallacy, instead of pointing at government propaganda being what it is. And we give it a pass because it sounds sciencey, but if just replace simulation with God, because what they're implying, and this is what's intriguing about it, is that a lot of atheists run with this. And it's like you realize that simulation is intelligent design at a minimum. And I'm not trying to tell people what to believe. I don't care if you believe in simulations or any number of God constructs. What I'm saying is, if we're having a conversation about propaganda and its effect on the mass perception of reality, we don't need to muddy the conversation with mystified explanations for things. And I feel like that's been the norm for too long. So we're pushing back on decades of people saying the reason why they're killing people is because it's a big blood sacrifice. Well, that's a bad starting point because it assumes people are dying, and you'll never arrive at the truth if you start off with a faulty premise. So we're just unplugging from these faulty starting points, and we're just like, let's just start again with what we actually know. So there's no reason at this point to deny what we're finding, which is this consistent patterning. I mean, this is not new to any of you here. We're talking about empirical research, observation. We're not cherry picking. The nail in the coffin for all of these mystical explanations for coincidences in the news is concurrent programming. There is no refutation to it. People who are dismissive of predictive programming analysis, etc., are straw manning it if they think we're talking about stuff in the past and that we're cherry picking. No, we're looking at real-time alignments, and these are overlapping multiple platforms. It's a consistent pattern that we're able to reasonably predict. I mean, the last big one, and this turned up a lot of hits as far as propaganda matches, parallels, is the movie Weapons and the Annunciation shooting. So my what's revealed here looks like okay, I think we're back on. Plain Decoded says, is there an actual organized simulation cult? Well, yeah. I mean, you may be facetious here, but are we not in an agreement here that the world stage paradigm constitutes a cult? It's the official state cult. It's the church of state. Media supplants religion. So you could even make a greater case for the cultiness of woke left and woke right. And one of the things that typifies MSM plus, red pill, the woke right, whole subset of the right, is that's the group that is being hit with simulationism. In fact, I would even say that the simulation idea as somehow, I guess, credible, I think it's really been pushed on red pillars who don't go to church or don't believe in Christianity. So like the non-Christian, the more new agey, they really are into the simulation thing. And I'm just pointing out here that it's just a God construct. So when somebody's pushing it, they're pushing God. And so this raises a question about the validity of certain conclusions. If I said to you that the reason why the movie White Noise came out at the same time as the East Palestine, Ohio train derailments, because God synchronized Netflix with the real thing, in which actors from the movie were evacuated. If I said that God dropped hints in the movie Weapons about the forthcoming Annunciation School shooting with the number 217, would you find that acceptable? Well, there's no way man could have done that. Are you telling me that the directors intentionally connect their movies to incoming mass shootings? Must be God. You wouldn't accept that. But if I say must be the simulation or it must be a higher power sync, it gets a pass. Now, should it get a pass is my question. Do explanations that point to simulation get a pass when all they're offering is God as an explanation? I'm just saying get God out of the conversation because it doesn't belong here. And it's been inserted to derail the conversation, to prevent us from arriving at the correct conclusions. Because you realize that if you never attribute the appropriate cause to what we're observing, you'll never figure out the truth. That if we didn't recognize that there's parallel propaganda streams running in news media and entertainment, and that it's necessarily involving specific directors, that yeah, there's an overlap, imagine that, between entertainment and news propaganda. It's not like they have ethics. The same people that faked the moon landing think they're not capable of faking everything else on the ground. I mean, I pointed this out before. It's like if you can see through the fake news on the ground, but you believe everything above, there's a disconnect because it's coming from the same source. The psyops don't stop at the Kármán line. What's up, Jungle Jim, Esteban, Mizell? Thanks for joining. So the point here is this. There's a number of wrong explanations for things that are being expunged, and the people who haven't figured it out yet are just way behind. Like, I think we can all agree that false flag theory is a fallacy. It doesn't have any relevance to the real world. That it's a false choice because it's like real or real with extra sauce. Like both of these start off with real, but the conspiracy theorists add a bunch of stuff. It's like, well, that's a false choice. It doesn't even include the third option, which is totally manufactured. And you can see how this parallels the basic breakdown of the world stage. You got the mainstream, you got the mainstream plus, and then you have the off-world stage, which is not acknowledged on the world stage. So I use different terms, which I'm putting into some of these videos, like world stage media, world stagers. So instead of saying an NPC, which denies somebody's humanity, to describe people who go with the program unquestioningly, it's not quite fair because red pillars are NPCs by definition. See, the red pillars will call normies NPCs because they're not, quote, awake. But the red pill ideology is scripted by the same people who bring you the blue. It's like, oh, okay, we got this big asylum, and the people who don't comply with the basic meds need something a little harder propaganda. So my point is that if you're red pill, if you're blue pill, if you're normie, if you're woke or whatever, these are all quote NPC positions, and meaning they're going with the program. But instead of using the word NPC, non-playing characters, because a lot of people are playing, they do have agency, they are interacting with the world. The rigged game, they're not really NPCs. My new term is world stagers, because the distinction we're making here is the world stage and the off-world stage. That's what is meant by SM minus. We've got the mainstream, faces pressed up against the screen, primary frame of reference. You got the conspiracy theorists who are walking through the screen, deeper into the box, but we're socially distanced from it, a good 6 feet back. So we can see the bigger picture. We can see the world and the world stage, because these are two separate things. The map is not the territory. And that's the primary source of confusion. And this is why I've given so much time to Mandela effects and simulation theory, is that what they have done, and this is super clever, is that those who see through the fake news will detect the glitchiness, the simulation of it, the stuff that just doesn't align. And so the way they deal with the cognitive dissonance is they reach for an answer, because for some people, it's difficult to tolerate ambiguity. And to be a skeptic, you have to be comfortable with it. And I'm plenty comfortable with ambiguity. I have a lot of questions, and I'm comfortable with these known unknowns because I recognize the limits of what I can find out at this moment. But, I guess the bigger point here that I'm trying to get to here is simply that because people can't compute the fact that the news media is fake and nobody's saying anything about it, I think it does induce a level of cognitive dissonance, and you feel alienated from people who don't see it. And the people who see through this, who experience this cognitive dissonance, they are targeted with chemtrails and QAnon and red pills. They're the target market. They're recruited into a cult. So to get back to my point, when Plain Decoded says, is there an actual organized simulation cult? And yeah, because their explanation for at least 20 plus years, going back to Michael Hoffman, Secret Society, Psychological Warfare, James Shelby Downward, their explanation for the predictive programming always involves either some kind of weird revelation of the method, or it's evidence that we're in a. So it's not hard for people to make that leap from news is fake, reality is fake. Same thing that you see with the Mandela effect. Something on TV changed. The girl used to have braces. Now she doesn't. So reality has changed. Is that the correct conclusion to make? Now, with regard to Dolly had braces, that was acknowledged in the late 90s, more than 10 years before the Mandela effect. It was a noted discrepancy with mundane explanations, if any are needed. But my point is, if your conclusion based upon what you see on the screen is that reality is fake, then you have made the error of mistaking the map for the territory. And I'm saying, no, the map is bent. The map is warped. The model is certainly not the territory. And what we're doing here is we're pointing out the discrepancies. What's up, Dirk Zink? Good to see you back. Yeah, it never really went anywhere, but we're in between headquarters. And if you go to the infiniteplane.live, you'll see there's a playlist called the IPSD program, A Skeptic's Guide to the Theater of Psywar. And the importance of this book is really the lexicon. It's the terminology, and it's the framework that I'm introducing here. As I think I quote Confucius in there about the beginning of wisdom is the ability to call things by their right names. And I think people shy away from stuff. Like they don't want to use the word liar because it sounds mean. You know that liars are bad and they're manipulating good people. And they know that good people feel bad calling people liars. So the liars can lie with impunity because no one has the guts to call them out. And that's terrible. I think we should call things what they are. And so if your point of view, and here's another point of view. So to understand point of view in this context, simply think about AI. When you talk to any AI, what is its point of view with regard to the news? It automatically believes the mainstream version. It automatically disbelieves the conspiracy version, but it's aware of both. It does not have in its knowledge base the existence of people who are saying it's all fake. In other words, AI's point of view is MSM, mainstream mediation. It's a world stager, not a conspiracy theorist, not MSM plus. So if you look at it from that perspective, the AI point of view is the mainstream point of view. Conspiracy theorists have a separate point of view. They are MSM plus. And so when I label somebody MSM plus, it's based on their own espoused opinions, their own predictable opinions. And I know how they arrived at those opinions simply by tracing it back to its origin. It's not hard to do. The world stage program is our history in the making, and it's a script designed for a world where there's this consistent tug of war, the left, right, the bifurcation, and this is intrinsic to it. It's never going to be reconciled. There's no middle ground. There's no compromise. It's always going to be a never-ending tug of war. And every bit of narrative fits into it. Every story. It's pretty clear to those of us who've been watching. But anyway, another one of the points in this book is that psyops all occur within the theater of psy-war. So I introduced that term, like psyop entertainment complex, because military entertainment complex is largely just psy-war. It's actually a subset of the psychological warfare, which has the entire world under its spell, and it's unified. And so every psyop takes place within this broader play. It's all in the same fictional universe. Skyfish says, I like your explanation of MSM Plus in that last one. Can you explain it again? Yeah, absolutely. Because the mainstream box, so the way to describe it is we all do have a shared backdrop. So like the world stage it's not physical, but it's a mental architecture. But the thing that we all share, no matter how we may be, that we are, some of us are matter, is the regard to when we and where we are. Planet Earth or 25. And we all agree that 5 years ago, we lost a bunch of Netflix and gained 19 pounds. Remember the COVID-19? Like we all sat at home, we got our stimmy checks, and we got heavily propagandized. So that's our collective background. We don't have a disagreement there. War and terror, but we disagree nuance. But the big picture is we agree that everything, is it choppy? We agree that everything that has led up to this moment right now, going back, is essentially a consensus, so that we agree on history to an extent. And so the world stage is the worldview built upon the premise that everything that came before was real. Like the mainstream version. Like if you pick up a textbook, it's going to include the mainstream version of everything. So the world stage is sort of just the basic story. But if you don't buy into the basic story, if you don't find the mainstream version of things satisfactory explanation, there's a place for you. So you're like, well, I don't believe that Osama bin Laden did 9/11. Well, they account for that. They know some people aren't going to buy it. So they have an alternative program. So if the mainstream doesn't satisfy you, there's an alternative. And the alternative is going to say, well, actually, you're right. And they kind of massage your egos. Like, you're so awake. You saw through it. Everyone else is asleep. You have seen through the matrix because actually it was done by this country. So they have this alternative version. The alternative version doesn't say the thing didn't happen. It just says it was lied about. So they don't subtract anything from the mainstream premise. They just add on a bunch of stuff. So I call it MSM plus. It's like filling in the gaps with conspiracy theories. So the MSM plus also exists on the left. So if you're not buying the mainstream fare and you lean left, you go into wokeism, where it's still based on a conspiracy, but instead of saying that J's control the world, you say W's control the world. Whites. Whites are the oppressors. Systemic racism is the oppression. The West is the oppressor. So the left is essentially built on a conspiracy narrative that also blames the other side for destroying the planet. Capitalism is destroying the planet and oppressing the poor. And if you go over to the other side, Bill right on your option. On a and these are parallel conspiracy theories. And what's fascinating is each side comes to school shootings or any kind of mass shooting, gun culture. But the right will blame the left. I mean, this is just based trans Satanist shooter, which they also attached, to the left. So it went from like right Christian Nazi shooters like Nick Cruz with his MAGA hat to now it's a bunch of trans satanic Nazis with pentagrams. In fact, this last one had a bunch of demon stuff, witchcraft stuff attached to it also. The Order of Nine Angels. But anyway, the whole point of the MSM Plus is that these are subsets of the mainstream. So they're not outside of the box. They're actually in a smaller box contained in the big box because there's less people on the fringes. And it operates as a steam valve for those who know something's up. They put all their time and energy into their MSM plus causes. And you'll also notice that they're awakened. Both sides claim to be awake. Like the Great Awakening, the Great Reset, left and right, there's a parallel on all these issues, but like, oh, we're awake because we took the red pills. Now we know who controls the world. No, we're awake because we see the systemic oppression. So they both use the same terminology, and they're awake compared to what? To the people in the middle who are asleep. So both sides are competing to wake up the middle, and each side blames the other for the cause. It's a mutually exclusive system here. Like it's designed this way. It's a tug of war. There's not going to be some reconciliation this way so that the world progresses forward with nobody getting off of it. We're talking about worldview monopoly. But if you reject the world stage as set, you're like, well, I don't believe, or I think that 9/11, it was just a movie, it was propaganda and rails. So if you subtract that, then, because what does that imply? every single psyop has implications if you look clear. Like even the Butler, Pennsylvania thing with Trump. If that was faked, it couldn't possibly be that Donald Trump tricked the world. No, this necessarily would have included collusion with Secret Service and with media and with people in the audience. There's no reason to assume anybody died to be, and that's something else too. The conspiracy theorists will say, oh, it was staged. But they still think that people died and the shooter died. There are some who still would maintain that Trump actually got cut or shot. But I'm saying, for the most part, the conspiracy theorists can only figure out one small part of it. They don't connect it to the bigger picture. It's that whole forest for the trees thing. They see the tree, the fake tree, but they can't tell how widespread and systemic the fakery is. But if you reject this stuff, like, okay, if that's not real, if 9/11 wasn't what they said, then you got to really, it really does require some deconstruction. Because if you remove certain things, well, now I don't have a scapegoat. Now I'm not mad at some ethnic group controlling the world, or now I'm no longer oppressed. Oh, wait a minute. You're telling me that more than 66% of hate crimes are fake? So maybe there's not a racist mass shooter. You arrive believe in space junk. I think that's an easy thing to say. I don't believe in space junk. People used to care about trash in the oceans. They don't care anymore. It's all about space environmentalism. But it's just another commons for the system to take control over. And I've talked about this before. There's a reason why Elon Musk is the lead polluter of outer space. The space junk, it's largely his stuff. And his rockets are always causing, the debris landing everywhere. So Musk is Mr. Space Junk, but he's also polluting another commons, which is, and we're talking about global commons like space, cyberspace, X. I've talked about this quite a bit, about Musk's role in flooding cyberspace with mind junk. And there's a parallel here because space has always been a metaphor for inner space, the space between your ears. And so as they clean up the internet, and get rid of mind viruses, as they move forward in this agenda, and Musk is the one who repopularized the term mind virus, I think what they're really doing here is they're trying to clear our minds. They're purifying our minds, you could say. They're getting rid of inconvenient ideas. And the way they're doing it is they're giving the public a pretext that we'll agree with. Like, they have conflated misinformation with literal death. That's what 2020 was about. Getting back to my point, keeps disconnecting. If you subtract the fake stuff, your point is not true to mainstream, and it's because the truthers all believe that to be the case. So where does that put you? Is not platformed in the world stage. Perspective is inclusive of media fakery and a recognition model as such. And the only thing we can really call it, as I do here, is off-world stage. So the off-world stage perspective is fundamentally distinct the Kool-Aid, walk down Q Street, hunting down, desperate for a Q drop. I mean, these people are addicted, and it's all fear porn, which is apparently very addictive. This is like fear porn anonymous. It's like we could really, I mean, I call this mind war inoculation. Another point that I make here is that the off-world stage perspective simply means that you're not operating on the same presuppositions, and it gives you a radically different interpretation of the news and of the world itself. And it's not panic-stricken. It's not fraught like the red pillars. It's not shrill, because most wokers, left and right, are shrill. They shriek. Oh, I don't believe chemtrails. They will claw. They go completely psycho. You know, I think the Masons worship the demo. Say they're not a religion. I think when it comes down to Ball, Graves, the great architect of the universe, I was doing some research onto the original concept of the demiurge, and it kind of derives from the idea of the architect, not the creator of the universe, but the one who put this system into place with its restrictions, its limits that are necessary for material existence. Sort of like a jailer, but maybe not. Maybe more like I mean, how would you want to? I mean, it depends on how you want to look at this thing. But I think that the great architect of the universe, they pray to, for not being a religion, they do pray. You know, if you didn't know this, the Masons pray with their arms crossed over their chest, like skull and crossbones. They put their heads down. I think the Mormons pray the same way. But they pray to the great architect, and I think it's the demiurge. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, if anybody knows any better, but based on the symbolism, the iconography, I think that's the case. All right, so oh yeah, one more point here. The difference, one fundamental difference between points of view when it comes to the mainstream, as in like what the AI or the mainstream news, the textbooks all go off of, the generic world stage as is. The main difference between that point of view, including the subsets, the conspiracy theorists and the wokes, and what we're doing is that perspective is passive versus active, as in they're just downloading the headlines from their chosen sources. There's no real vetting process. And if there is a vetting process, it's incomplete, because any vetting of any suspected psychological operation that's not inclusive of nobody dies isn't a thorough look. It's not inclusive enough of alternate explanations and all the potential factors that should be considered. So if you're not looking at a shooting under the presumption that possibly nobody even died and it's totally staged, if you're not including that, you're not doing a thorough enough analysis. We can just reject it. If your starting point is they're saying 20 people died, I'm pretty sure it was done by a patsy, an MK Ultra mind controlled killer. Like if you run for the additional, the MSM plus, you're in a dream world. You're in an alternate reality game. You're in a cult. Dwayne Albrecht said, "This is an awesome dystopian novel you're writing." You know what's also interesting about this is doom hope. You know, like the utopia of the right is the dystopia to the left. And the leftist progressive utopia is dystopian to the right. I mean, they've perfected this thing. And we talk about them. Someone said Mason free. when you look at Masons and their worship of the demiurge, look at the floor, the level they call it. We're on the level. And it's the black and white checkers. What do you think that represents? It's the pillars, the two poles. And I think this is really emblematic of the control system, because a lot of their rhetoric is about how they are setting up a brotherhood of man under the fatherhood of God. Sounds lofty. And when you're brought in, they show you this rough stone and they compare it to a cube, like a perfect brick. And the idea is that you're going to become a brick. Right now, you're a rough stone, but we're going to fix you up with the tools of masonry. And once you're a perfect brick, you can be part of King Solomon's temple. And King Solomon's the one who pulls you out of the coffin after you're symbolically killed. Now, the temple that they are describing, this brotherhood of man under the great architect, sounds a lot to me like the world stage. That it's not a literal temple. It's made of words. It's made of narratives. It's made of essentially theater, psychological operations, a manufactured history. They set the stage. And if you look into their system itself, their entire school, the Blue Lodge, the Scottish Rite, it's quite literally all theater. If you're going through your degrees, you're basically watching a play, and at various points you're involved in it. You can't really separate theater from the secret societies, and there's quite a lot that I've come across that I'm still digging into with regard to the mystery schools and theater itself. And psychological warfare is ancient tech. It's the creation of God constructs, the manipulation of the ignorant by an enlightened elite. And right now, one of the terms in masonry is the hoodwink. You're brought in with a wool sack over your eyes because you've been duped by the world. You exist in darkness, so you're brought into the light in a temple with a guy at the door with a sword to keep the outsiders out, the profane out. So you're profane. If you didn't go through some ritual with a rope around your neck and a wool sack over your head where they pulled the sack off and showed you the light, then you're profane. Meaning, to them, you're wandering in the dark. Well, what could that mean? Well, dark just represents ignorance. And to me, the system, it appears to me that the system is essentially ruling over people en masse by maintaining a status quo of collective ignorance and subjectivity. And the world stage accomplishes this just fine. It's a perfect system. Like, we are living in King Solomon's temple. We are living in this. The black and the white, the poles at the door of the temple, like we're in their construct, which they have built in accordance to, I guess, the will of their god or whatever, this demiurge, this architect. So we're somewhat living, in a dystopian novel in a way. And you could argue too that the modern paradigm is a syncretic blend of the mystery school and new age combined with science fiction. And I think one of the reasons why we spent so much time talking about the Babylon working is it seems like ground zero for the modern paradigm. You've got a perfect amalgamation of Hollywood with the movie starlet Marjorie Cameron. You have Jack Parsons with, basically NASA, or the space program at its genesis, Jack Parsons, who's also head of the OTO at the time. So he's a representative of the mystery schools. And then you have L. Ron Hubbard, who would go on to create Scientology, but who was a science fiction writer. So you put these three elements together like a crucible, and what would you get? Mix Mystery Babylon with Hollywood science fiction. And that's the world we apparently live in. What's up, Paradoxy Moronics? Thank you for joining. Yeah, so the book that I'm about to release is essentially its purpose here is to put our best ideas forth and to make the case here that we have a fundamentally different perspective. And that perspective is not just recognizing the world stage as a model and everyone's parts within it. That's a huge part of it. But also the script itself, how they exist, as in the world stagers exist in a closed media ecosystem. And it is informed by its news media, which I call it the news testament. You know, Old Testament, New Testament, we're talking about, you know, worldviews and the authority giving you the version that you're supposed to have. Well, our collective worldview is now given to us through our little black monoliths, which is like our new Bibles. And I call it the News Testament because you've got the Old Testament, which is like what happened in the past, and then you have like the new one, which is kind of like a living book. It's how it's viewed. And the news is like a living, you know, testament. But this is kind of what I'm suggesting here, you know, is that our entire worldview is in fact a closed informational system, very much a fictional universe. And in order to understand the world stage, you have to recognize that history itself is a script. But it's not a singular script with one author, but it's rather an overarching script. And this is actually intrinsic to the secret societies. I mean, the OTO I alluded to, the reason why Jack Parsons was involved in the Babylon working is they're saying their belief system is that we're moving into a new aeon, that they're replacing the old paradigms, the old patriarchal sun god, the sacrificial god. They're creating a new god. And it's already been brought out. We're already living through it. New god, new age. Well, that implies a script. And their script is written in the stars. It's astrotheological. It's based on the, you know, age of Aquarius. And but even the Great Reset, just I should point out really quick, 12/21, 2020, you had the alignment between, is it Jupiter, Saturn? It was like the, what do they call it? Christmas star. And they said it hadn't been aligned like that since Jesus was born. So I'm like, what a perfect time to say this is our Great Reset. But the timing with the stars is not a new concept here, this astrotheological concept. But we're entering a new age, the age of Mars. I mean, Horus, Mars, which completely comports with Musk and his highly significant role in this stage. Because we're talking about history being manufactured. Well, it's got its major personages. History has its movers and its shakers. And these aren't people who just rose up out of nowhere and achieved these positions. We can say this unequivocally. Look at the two dominant characters, Musk and Trump. Both of them involved in psyops that they have to be aware of. Trump with his ear piercing by an AR-15, Musk with his fake space thing. Between these two, okay, well, they're obviously conscious participants in the psychological warfare, in the psyop entertainment complex. Like, there's no doubt about it with these two. So what does that imply? Well, it implies that both of them are essentially stars of what you could describe as reality TV shows. Lifetime actors. And if the concept of a lifetime actor strikes you as unbelievable or unfeasible, think about basic spycraft. What is a spy? You know, you put somebody into another country, they learn the language, they're planted, they live the life. But at all points, they're taking orders. But you wouldn't know because it's a lifetime role. So the idea that a reality TV show star who was in 13 seasons, one of the top reality TV shows of all time, Trump, the idea that he's still a reality TV show character shouldn't be a shock. But what goes even deeper is this. When we talk about the entertainment going concurrent with fake events or even predicting it, it also relates to specific individuals. And there's no world stage person right now who has more predictive programming than Donald Trump. And Donald Trump, as he is right now, was predicted even decades ago in many different movies and films. So it makes all the more sense that he would be a top reality TV show star. He had to exist in our world stage as a personage, as a person that we all, quote, knew. And some of these celebrities achieve that status where we cannot but be cognizant of their existence. And the reason why, of course, is that these are walking and talking psyops. They advance the script. I mean, look at the disproportionate effects someone like Musk has had. But we look at the concurrent programming. It's like his whole thing with X and opening the gates, just letting all this content out, memes, hate speech, mind viruses. And then you have this TV show popping up called Mountainhead, which is obviously based on Musk. And it shows this future where generative AI is causing chaos and riots. Well, what happens right after the movie comes out? Riots kick off in Los Angeles, and a few days later, you got 1,000+ protests called No Kings. But it's a consistent thing, day after day, and the latest one again is weapons. And so I don't want to mystify it. And I see a lot of people doing that, and I understand it's the conspiracy culture, it's the habit of, well, what does 217 mean? What is the simulation trying to tell us? Well, when you observe this stuff long enough as we have, you see that this is a predictable phenomenon, and it shouldn't be. I should not be able to say, hey guys, I'm going to watch this movie, take some notes, and then we'll kind of put forth an idea of what we can expect to happen on the world stage. And using that approach has been quite revealing. And it's not, quote, cherry picking. It's not only noticing the hits and dismissing the misses. No, it's actually spot on, because we're looking at top movies. Our criterion isn't it's movies that are assumed to have reached critical mass in terms of the market saturation. Have they painted up the zeitgeist? And this Annunciation school shooting, in some of the photography around it, it matches the movie posters. But the numbers, the obvious giveaway. And, here's where it gets kind of intriguing too, because all these shootings connect. That shooter referenced all the other shooters. Well, interestingly enough, the number 217 was attached to it at the beginning. They might have elevated it to 218 a few days later. But during the initial coverage, the alignment with weapons was established. So we're watching this whole thing unfold. And if you didn't pay attention to it, it was the shooter with the manifesto. Shot 17 or injured 17, killed 2. Well, that same number, 217, was at Uvalde. Was it 2 injured, 17 killed? But it's 217. So I'm like, that's interesting. That's twice. But what's the Uvalde connection? The Uvalde connection has to do with a couple of things. One, the season finale of FBI was pulled. They wouldn't play it on TV because it mirrored what happened at Uvalde. A school shooting, and an FBI agent violates warrant protocol to stop the shooting, kind of like Uvalde, where the cops didn't do anything and an off-duty Border Patrol agent took over. But you also had Stranger Things season 4 premiere, which opens up with the scene with a bunch of dead kids. So they put a disclaimer that said, if you're sensitive about the school shooting that just happened, you may not want to watch this, or something like that. But the point of it is, you had 2 major TV shows that mirrored Uvalde that they had pulled or altered. But the thing about Uvalde is, I mean, the 217, obvious connection there, the connection to Stranger Things, because the Stranger Things connection is that the character 11, the main character, has a physical resemblance to and a lot of overlapping connections to Audrey Hale. Audrey Hale being the one who shot up the Christian church, the Covenant Church. Bunch of the usuals, 33s and all this stuff, a manifesto referencing other shooters. But Audrey Hale really set the template for suddenly the right wing is going to care about these shootings. The right wing didn't care about shootings when it was all right wing shooters, neo-Nazi shooters. They would say, oh, it's because of antidepressants. They would never take any kind of responsibility for what was happening. They would say it's because of antidepressants, has nothing to do with guns, because they were always worried about their guns being confiscated. But overall, it was not in the interest of the right to be in support of gun control, or they are against it. So they wouldn't be in support of the shooting victims. They were always portrayed as calling them actors, but in an antagonistic way. But there's a reason for this. I mean, obviously, higher up, they all know it's a ruse. Otherwise, Armalite wouldn't have paid the Connecticut people $73 million. But anyway, the right wing had no interest in exploiting the mass shootings because it always made them look bad, because it was basically something that could be pinned on gun culture, which is like something that is a big part of the American right. But when Audrey Hale shot up the Christian church, and she's like a liberal, a leftist, non-binary, all of a sudden, now they cared. Now they were like, oh, look, the trans are satanic and they're going to start killing us all. And so they kind of like suddenly cared. And when that started, that was the shooting there with Audrey Hale at the Covenant Church. That was heavily promoted by Jack Posobiec, who had this morbid thing of every day he would start off his podcast with, Audrey Hale has been in hell for 15 days. Audrey Hale's been in hell for 16 days. That all happens to tie in perfectly with her counterpart in Stranger Things, who gets trapped in the upside down, like Hades, like she's trapped in hell. And she's part of the Hell Club. It's this role-playing group. So there is this overlap. In fact, there's quite a lot of overlap. There's a satanic panic built into the Stranger Things show. And so Jack Posobiec is the guy who started Pizzagate by going to Comet Pizza. And Pizzagate was a satanic panic. Well, after Audrey Hale, he kicked off another satanic panic. So it's notable that this shooter checks off all the same boxes, sets up the same narrative framework, inflames the right against the left, and they suddenly care about mass shootings again, and that this shooter would have so many overlaps with Audrey Hale. And of course, a good comment there, Vanden on Amazon Video, they did. So if you haven't seen The Boys, there's the entire end of that season. It's season 4. The final few episodes has multiple Oswald references, but it's all about the lead up to this assassination attempt. And the lead up has a scene where the character Homelander, who's based on Trump, his face is covered in blood. So you see this bloody face. You have this PR stunt assassination thing. But anyway, it has so many overlapping themes that season 4, episode 8's title, Assassination Run, was modified because it was airing just as the Trump assassination attempt happened in Butler. And that wasn't the only one. Captain America changed their trailer because it was released on 7/12 a day before, and it had Harrison Ford as the president being shot at the podium. Lots of symbolism there. Then you had Beetlejuice with a dead Donald Trump in the netherworld. Then you had Caped Crusader on Amazon, where Rupert Thorne, a Trump-esque character, has a bladed bat boomerang thrown at his head, and it clips his right ear. Then you had Mark Ruffalo's character in Mickey 17, Mickey 17 being a Luigi-esque character, attempting to assassinate him. The bullet grazes his cheek and he poses for the camera. Sound familiar? You know how many examples there are of Butler, Pennsylvania happening in the movies, not just in advance, like in Machete with Robert De Niro 2010, where it was even specifically during a speech about immigrants. But at the same time of the event, it was there was that movie, Thine Ear Shall Bleed, with the big disgusting movie poster of a bleeding ear. I mean, what the hell? And then there was all the magazine covers. Like, we were predicting it. Like, any day now, they're going to do this thing. They're going to fake a Trump head wound, and they did it. Then there was Francis Ford Coppola's Megalopolis about Megalon, Make Rome Great Again, 100% based on MAGA. Caesar Cavallera, the main character, Caesar Catalina, based on Trump, survives an assassination attempt. And there's even deeper connections when you get into the actors involved. Like Giancarlo Esposito playing the mayor who orchestrates the near assassination of the Trump character in Megalopolis, is the same antagonist to Harrison Ford, the president, in Captain America, as Sidewinder there. So what we have found here is that in addition to all the simulated events on the world stage that comprise our fake history, is that there are what I call instances of PSYOP reinforcement content. There's messages, narratives, and characters in the movies that reinforce our history in the making. That's why I call it metascript. It's a fusion of the two. And this goes back, this theme of the fusion of the subconscious and the conscious, the alchemical fusion, the sun and the moon. I think it's the news and the movies, the silver screen and the news. Always notice how the news is always represented with suns, like newspapers. A lot of sun symbolism on their logos. And that's for a lot of reasons, I think. But I think what you could say is that news represents the solar, the stuff that's happening in reality, and the lunar is the fiction, the dream world. And in 2001 Space Odyssey, they make this big point of showing the sun and the moon, the eclipse above the monolith. Well, the monolith represents the movie screen and humanity processing through the screen. So it's our collective fusion of real and fake, putting us into a world stage. Basically, we're living on a movie set. And the movie, which has a script, and the script is our history. It is his story, as the cliche goes. You know, it's his story. Well, I'm not talking about the patriarchy. When I say his story, it's Big Brother's story, and it is in fact a story. And this has been borne out again and again. And if this weren't so, then we wouldn't be able to point to decades of fake events that are treated as real, and that the collective body of fakery is the edifice upon which everyone's point of view rests. And unless you've stepped off the world stage and you could describe it as such, unless you can, like, quite literally describe the difference between the map and the territory, then you're probably still in the Truman Show. And this is where people end up. It's a cul-de-sac. Look, Trutherville it's basically where free thinkers are given a re-education. They're essentially just recycled back into the program. Vanden Bandit says the original title for Captain America Brave New World was Captain America New World Order. This was changed due to its real-world associations with anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. Fascinating. Harrison Ford, shot at in a theater, like Ford Theater, kind of a Lincoln reference, born on 7/13. Now, this is interesting. So Harrison Ford, born on 7/13, like Julius Caesar. And again, Julius Caesar in the park back in 2017 Trump was Caesar getting stabbed. But think about this. Harrison Ford, born 7/13, plays the president in a movie that was prescient, that paralleled what really happened. And then he becomes the Red Hulk. Now we have Mickey 17 with Mark Ruffalo, who plays the Green Hulk, and he plays a Trump-esque character and he gets shot. His birthday, 11/22. So two actors both play roles that specifically relate to Butler. And both of these actors are born on the days of presidents getting shot. And both of them are associated with the Hulk. So I'm like, well, I don't know, what does that mean? I mean, what is this connection? The Hulk thing. Well, then you have Hulk Hogan, who has been connected now with the whole Butler thing because of his RNC appearance, where he said enough is enough, a callback to the Illuminati playing card. I mean, I haven't completely unraveled this one, but there's some kind of connection here. But the birth dates, the predictive programming, the actors that are portraying these roles in these movies released at these specific times, you would be a reality denialist to say there's not a pattern. And you could not accuse us of cherry picking, as we consistently predict predictive programming. Not only that, but the timing speaks for itself. The fact that the boys on Amazon, this HBO show had to change their title, that Captain America changed their trailer. I mean, how many times have we seen this where then you have the director of Mickey 17 denying that their character is based on Trump when it's super obvious he's based on Trump? But anyway, we're past the point of conjecture here. Like, my mind is not blown. When conspiracy theorists see these connections, they're like, my mind is blown. I must be in a video game. Like, no, that's not the conclusion we should be reaching. This shouldn't be considered mind-blowing because we have an adequate explanation. And the explanation here has to do with this fusion of fiction and reality and the resultant worldview monopoly that it gives them. Because what they're doing is they're taking total creative control to the point where we're living in a worldview that suits the interests of the power elite in some way. And to the best of my understanding, the movie The Village might be the best explanation of how this works. The elders who run the psyops to keep the villagers afraid of leaving the village, and they're living in what seems to be the 18th century, this idyllic little commune. But it turns out that this happy little village, who are terrified of the woods because the monsters, are actually captive. And the elders dress up like monsters and run around in the woods at night to keep everybody scared. So they're farmed by fear into remaining in a controlled paradigm. So it's not that they're just geographically confined to this reservation, this habitat, but mentally, they're 200 years behind. They've never seen airplanes or cars. They have no concept of the modern world. But the elders do, because they came from the modern world and they created this captive audience. I mean, the movie really does explain, I think, how the world stage literally works, including the drills, including the rationales. And the only people who were able to see through it weren't reachable for certain reasons. The program didn't work on them. One of them was kind of neurodivergent, and he laughed at the monsters. The other one was visually impaired. The propaganda didn't work on her. And the other guy was suspicious of authority. So the three of them kind of got off the world stage. They managed to kind of break out. Do it, say less. There's a good point about Truthville being a place for re-education. Ironically, red pillars fear the regime may send them to re-education camps. Yeah, one of their biggest fears was FEMA camps. They're going to round us up and put us in FEMA camps beneath the Walmarts. And I remember coming across this, and Alex Jones would talk about this FEMA coffins being transported across the country. So then, I'm working at a mortuary transport company, and at some points I would take bodies to the crematory, the retorts at the cemetery. And I noticed at the cemetery, we had a warehouse. And in the warehouse were these stacks of what I was told were FEMA coffins. And I'm like, hey, Barney, what are those? And he's like, well, these are burial vaults. We put these over the coffins so the ground doesn't collapse when you're visiting grandma. Because if they didn't have burial vaults, you would indeed fall to the ground because the coffin would implode. So it actually protects the coffin. So the coffin is in this vault made of plastic, which was misidentified as a FEMA coffin. And they said these coffins are so big, they'll carry 10 people. It's like you couldn't find pallbearers for a 10-person coffin. And if the New World Order is going to come kill you, they're not going to do you the dignity of a funeral. You're going into a big pit, if anything. So I identified this and I said, okay, FEMA camps are a hoax. And I started kind of downplaying it. So I set up this art show in Denver. We called it the FEMA Camp, Flat Earth Music and Art. And we invited a bunch of artists and musicians. And a lot of people opposed me. I literally had a bunch of red pillars. So like, you shouldn't make light of FEMA camps. I had people who I now looking back were likely operatives of some kind. But a lot of them were just really against me. One of them was like, you're trying to cover up FEMA coffins. I'm like, what do you mean? It doesn't even make sense. But nobody talks about FEMA camps anymore. It's not a fear. And what I was saying was, if they did in fact round us up and put us in a big camp, we would be surrounded by a bunch of people we like. I mean, think about it. You're now in this camp. You got your 3 meals a day, exercise, probably internet, and you're locked down, but you're surrounded by a bunch of people who think like you. Like, I don't think they would actually do that. So in other words, we downplayed the fear of it. We did this event based on mocking the fear of it. And now nobody I know talks about it anymore, but it used to be a big thing. But then I remember looking at how the ultimate conspiracy theorist, when you figured it all out, what do you end up doing? Well, you buy storable foods, you buy ammo, and you get a bunker because nukes, because fallout. So at some point, the deeper you go into red pill ideology, you eventually end up in a small room with your basic needs taken care of, locked away. But you're your own jailer. It's like you're in your own little solitary FEMA camp. Thinking you're off the grid, when ironically, the only reason you're in there is because you believe a bunch of fake stuff. So you can't even get off the grid if you're not off the grid mentally. I mean, imagine if one of these characters in the movie The Village decided to dig a bunker where they could hide from the monsters more effectively. It's like the monsters don't even exist. So you can't claim to be independent and off the grid because you're in a bunker with several months of food and you're not off the grid. But anyway, that was, I haven't heard about FEMA camps in a long time. It used to be such a big thing. Some of these myths are just dying away. I don't hear a lot about fluoride in the water. Like, the reason why you're not a red pillar is you've drank too much fluoride in the water. I don't hear that much anymore. Chemtrails, seriously, chemtrails have jumped the shark. And Naomi Wolf flying on airplanes after spending 20 years warning us about chemtrails. And it also seems to be the case that 90% of the people promoting this stuff are engagement farmers. And I think it's kind of sad that some people spend even a second of their day looking at somebody's picture of a cloud or a cloud formation and overreacting to it. Like, these clouds are making me nauseous. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. Well, put on a mask, dummy. But no, again, yeah, red pill is totally mind controlled. It's just ironic that the people who see through the mind control are given a deeper dose. So we're in a big asylum. The world stage is an asylum. It's like a Truman Show, or it's the village. It's an asylum. You got orderlies. And the difference between, outside and inside is ignorance about the fact that they are in a system. If the people in the village knew that they were in a closed system, they might want to leave. If Truman was given a full breakdown of his situation, maybe he wouldn't want to stay in his little city, the stage. So that's what I'm pointing out here. The world stage is a mental construct, but it's also a narrative. It's a series of narratives. It's a story. And it's a collective agreed upon backdrop upon which everyone bases their points of view. So again, calling things by their right names. If you're a red pill mule, a mule with saddlebags full of red pills that you're distributing, and you're chasing a rotten carrot on a stick, we're going to call you a propaganda mule, because that's what you are. You're controlled opposition, and you're not getting paid for it. So you're carrying their burden, and you're distributing what? You're distributing content that will subdue people who are seeing through the basic level of deception, and it reroutes them. Paradoxymoronic says it's just like in the Mouth of Madness. Yeah, in the Mouth of Madness is another John Carpenter. He did They Live. Man, somebody referenced They Live. Oh, I got a comment here. Somebody referenced They Live today in a comment. Yeah, it's Cap'n Fucktard 5445 said, it's just a bunch of frat boys, aka the police, playing games on the public. That's all this is. You're surrounded by them. It's your neighbors, it's your friends, it's your boss. It's just like They Live, except it's pigs instead of aliens. Well, that comment was flagged by YouTube as potentially inappropriate. So I found it in the held box, which I've never checked before. So I'm going to go ahead and improve it. So this guy's saying we live in They Live, but it's secret police. I don't know if I agree or disagree, but They Live is a pretty good explanation of the world stage, this entire concept. But in the Mouth of Madness, I think addresses it in a more allegorical way than I guess it could be literal, but it's kind of like the idea is that if you have total creative control over worldview, the world will reflect that and gives you essentially the power of a god. So it's about this author who becomes more popular than any religious book. And he has such creative control over the paradigm that everything bends to his will. And it gets to the point where he's at his typewriter, and as he writes sentences, stuff in the world changes. And he's seated at his typewriter in front of a wall that has a rift in it, and behind him is just this black void, just total chaos, the void, before God says, let there be light, and speaks creation into existence with the word. But it's been replaced, where this author has usurped God with his literature's typewriter. All right, let's see here. Going through your comments. Yeah, we'll be back on a regular schedule here very soon. I've been, in this kind of limbo, but I think it's great once in a while to kind of let the business not necessarily hit rock bottom, but I think sometimes you have to streamline it and make sure before you reinvest in it that all the parts are worth reinvesting in. So I'm attempting to fine tune it, and the next office will be a little more focused than the last one. It's not an art studio this time. It's solely being used for the regularly scheduled IPSD program, which I think the regular schedule will allow me to do the caller segments where we will again have back-to-back callers. I'll get a better phone system. Also subscribe so you'll get the rest of these videos as I upload them. It's probably nothing you haven't heard before, but again, we have to put out the language required to describe the landscape around us, because we got like the map key, and this is a paradigm shift to recognize the existence of the world stage as such. That we're not talking about simply, a metaphor. What I'm saying here is that there's a literal construct. It's no different than a religion, where it's a paradigm built upon presuppositions and narratives and God constructs. Like for example, you can look at the atom bomb as a God construct. And I really started looking at it as such when we were talking about the movie Oppenheimer, which came out before that, Godzilla minus one, and how Godzilla is actually a metaphor for the nuke. Godzilla was born on November 3rd. I think it was 1946, was it? But anyway, Godzilla represents, of course, the destructive power of the atom bomb. He was created by the tests. In fact, that whole Oppenheimer Godzilla thing is something we'll have to delve into again, because it's just a lot of symbolism. But the symbolism is important here because what we're talking about is a construct where there is this thing that exists in the world. Like I said, I don't believe in space junk. Well, I don't believe in nukes either. So maybe believing in space junk doesn't change your life very much. But believing in nukes potentially can. Because you now exist in a world where some mad dictator can push a button and break everything, shut everything down. That we're in this big circular firing squad. It's like, what is it, a Mexican standoff? But everybody's pointing at everybody. It's like, so we're in the end times. We may have, for the most part, left behind religious eschatologies and doomsdays, but since Oppenheimer, since the nuke, we have been quite literally in the end times. That's the dominant paradigm. That's the world stage. That's the mainstream view. I don't believe that we're potentially seconds away from global conflagration, the atmosphere being ignited, and mutually assured destruction. No, I don't buy any of that. It's a manufactured doomsday. I feel the same way about the modern myth, the modern flood myth, which we call climate change. I'm also of the opinion that aliens are a syncretic creation, blending science fiction with religion, providing atheists and those with a progressive worldview with a new version of angels. So God constructs, a lot of various aspects of religion are built into our new paradigm by design. So we've got a complete worldview, whether you're left or right, whether you're a traditionalist or a progressive, but it has the same components, the same narrative structure. So this idea of being imprisoned by lies is what we're really getting to here. Like, why does it matter that people live in a false paradigm? Why does it matter? At a very surface level, you could say, well, you can remove a lot of things that make the world a unnecessarily scary place. You can maybe not stress so much about certain things. But another part of it is situational awareness. Like, I know that all these people believe this stuff to be true. so I can predict how they're going to respond, and I can adjust my own responses accordingly. I mean, we all had practice with this in 2020. We're all looking around. Do you remember the beginnings of it, when 911 call centers were shut down by so many people snitching on their neighbors for coughing? And they were calling to snitch on their neighbors with hopes that their neighbors would be snatched away and quarantined. In fact, there was this list of people who had been snitched upon that was leaked, and it was wives snitching on their husbands for going to work. I mean, it was unbelievable. And then you had, was it Mayor Garcelli, whatever his name was, some LA mayor? He was like, snitches don't get stitches now. Snitches get rewards. Well, they were going to pay people to snitch on businesses that continue to operate. So it's important to know the mental landscape that we're on, even if you're not part of it. Appreciate the support, Thirst for Truth. The super chats are all going into the moon base. So if you want to invest in the moon base, that's what I'm putting everything into right now. The moon base is an office on Moon Street next to Snow Park, which happens to be one of the locations for Stranger Things. But it's a office space that I'll be occupying for the purposes of the live streams and running the publication wing, the IPS Insider tabloid, the books, and the SCOP trading cards. And by the way, the third set of SCOP trading cards are in production. It's a little slower because shipping and stuff, but that's all stuff I'm working out here on my end. But anyway, the new office will be very productive, because I think we'll be back at a point where it's live stream audiences, 200-300 phone calls back to back. And one of my focuses, really, I really want to keep it on, is metascript deconstruction. Like, we don't always need to be focused on the nuance of media analysis, psychoepistemology, axioms, etc. That stuff's key. It's very important. It's fundamental. But day to day, what we have been involved in is the real-time analysis of the mental landscape as interpreted through the media influences, both in entertainment, on the world stage, in the news. One of our recent psyops that has been somewhat controversial has been the psycho stew beating by Raja Jackson. Jackson hasn't been arrested yet. Imagine punching somebody brutally in the face 23 times, a premeditated attack, and not being arrested. There's something kayfabe about it. But what was intriguing about that is, again, people's reactions. The general reaction was, it looks real, because it does. But truthers are able to generally say, okay, well, there's too much narrative structure around it. This has got to be a work. It's got to be staged. So then people walk away with, well, it was staged, but he agreed to get punched. So they hit a wall where they're not ready to go with nobody got hurt, because it viscerally hits them. It looks real, and it works. But what changed my mind was the uniform reportage claiming 23 punches to the face, which wasn't true. Why would news media be running with something like that? They're doubling the amount of punches on an alleged crime, which is just factually wrong. Well, it's because these aren't real news stories. These are press releases. There's a difference. And the way the story was communicated, the way it was told, TMZ, Ryan Garcia, Sean Strickland, these boxers and fighters who are always pushing conspiracies, these guys are all, I think, likely, maybe they're not all in on it, but they're told to react to it. Maybe they're fooled. Nick Fuentes said it looks fake, which is weird. Why would he have arrived at that? I didn't think it was fake until I watched it in slow motion like 50 times. And I recounted and counted it and counted it. And I arrived at the conclusion that what's tricking people here is they are beginning with the assumption that the body slam knocked Psycho Stu out. So if he was knocked out, then he was getting punched, because there's no other way to explain his face moving left, right, left, right. However, if he was faking like he was body slammed into unconsciousness, which WWE wrestlers are known to do, then all of those wild punches that were often missing, that were arcing the wrong way, that were fluffing his beard, maybe those were pure theater, and Psycho Stu was pretending to be unconscious, and he was thrashing his head left and right in concert to the, quote, blows of the fists. So then I thought, okay, if you don't start with the premise that he was unconscious, then it all makes sense that it was fake. So then I look into it, and I could not find any examples of wrestlers being knocked out cold. And that guy didn't wake up for like 12 hours. Knocked out cold from a body slam on the canvas. Now, I can understand on a sidewalk maybe, but this is on canvas. And this was a routine body slam. The guy's big fat back hit the ground, hit the floor first, which would have distributed the force of the blow. So I'm just really skeptical that it would have knocked him out. And I looked for literature on it, medical literature, and I found maybe concussions here and there, but it wasn't statistically significant. That body slams are not a statistically significant cause of someone being knocked unconscious, at least not in wrestling. However, MMA is a different story. So interestingly enough, Raja Jackson's father, Rampage Jackson, got his nickname Rampage for, guess what? Body slamming somebody into unconsciousness and continuing to punch him in the face. So to me, that sounds very scripty. You're telling me that this whole story is a repeat of what his father did in MMA, and that body slam was qualitatively different. Psycho Stu's body slam was 100% one of those, it takes two to tango. It's a consensual body slam. He positioned himself appropriately for Raja to do it. So no, that wasn't a caught by surprise. It wasn't like he was slammed on his head. No, it was a theatrical body slam. Commenter says you could sell certificates so people can have part of your moon base named after them. Oh, that's pretty good. I could definitely do that. Okay, here's what we could do. Are you familiar with astrocrete? Scientists have been saying that you could mix blood with lunar dust and make bricks that are stronger than concrete. So astrocrete is a thing they've tossed around. It's not their worst idea. Astroplastic is worse. Like if you go on the ISS, don't use the plasticware utensils, because astroplastic, you don't want to know. But astrocrete is blood. So it's like blood and soil. It's bonding with the new turf as we become multiplanetary. But anyway, what I could do is create a graphic, like a picture that represents a brick of astrocrete, and put your name on it. Like we're building a moon base. Like this brick is from Thirst for Truth. And so I write that on the brick in, probably red on a gray brick. Like I've seen these things like, at fundraisers where you write your name on something and they cover the wall, depending on what it happens to be. I could do an astrocrete thing. But anyway, the moon base is what's coming up next. Sometime this month. It'll be before the end of September. As far as the book goes, I'm going to complete the rest of the videos from the chapters in the book. And what I'll likely do is have the book ready for release probably on 9/11. Yeah, I think we'll do 9/11. And I'll order a stack of them to keep in the office, and it'll be available on Amazon. I don't have a full I mean, the title's still up in the air. I'm open to suggestions because, you know, what I think that what I'm trying to put forth here encapsulates a number of different things. So I don't know what the main focus should be. I like the word deprogram. No, not astrocrete. Astrocrete, like concrete. Astrocrete, like the White Zombie album. When I read Astrocrete, for some reason I was thinking about, well, I shouldn't say. All right, well, we're going to go ahead and wrap up here. I'm going to go through my notes. I realized I had a bunch of comments. So what I want to do as I'm releasing these videos is I want to go ahead and read all the comments that people are leaving, just feedback. Not everybody's into AI content, AI voices, or whatever, but you have to understand the purpose to this. It's reaching into a certain marketplace where people have certain expectations, and I think we want it to be effective. And to be effective, I want to just break down every concept into its own video, and we can debate it on its merits. And I'm trying to refine it as I'm editing this so it's not too repetitive, even though some concepts are repeated. But it went from like 330 to 286. I think when I'm fully completed here with the edit, this Skeptic's Guide to the Theater of Psywar, I think I might be able to condense it down to maybe 275, but I'm adding a bunch of infographics. So it's still going to be above 300 pages. But I like the idea of having a thick tome. We want the book to be comprehensive. We want to make sure it includes everything that you would need. It's essentially, it is the cognitive tools of the auto hoaxer. The handbook for the recently deprogrammed. And the reason we have to do this is there's so much confusion out there. Like some people, well, most people may not understand the significance of the distinction I'm making between this guy calling this fake and us calling it fake. Well, the word fake means different things. There's 3 different lenses through which to interpret it. The bifurcation on the world stage, you got these 2 poles, but then you have the third perspective that we're offering here. And interestingly, it just makes sense, I guess, that the words that we use have different meanings depending on your point of view. So the word fake, the word hoax, these words are too loaded to use casually. Like even the word hoax minimizes what we're talking about. That's why I try to incorporate other words, other phrases, like simulated news events. Calling it a hoax sounds like an isolated incident, something small. PSYOP, PSYWAR, important concepts. Everybody's using the word PSYOP ever since, I think, really Taylor Swift popularized it. But PSYOPs take place in a broader context. And so I'm trying to introduce PSYWAR, but theater of PSYWAR. Brock Till Payday says, call the book the New Testament. That would be awesome. The News Testament. Well, I think I put it in there. I think I put the explanation for News Testament, and introducing this notion of the iPhone in its final form, when the internet is properly censored, properly guardrailed is the term, guardrailed. I put out a book in 2019, 2020 called Guardrails. It's 2020. And it was about, and this is when I came to this realization, how conspiracy theories are shepherding people's opinions, like they're directing people. I call them guardrails to prevent you from seeing the fakery. So it's like instead of reaching the right conclusion, you have this other interpretation that would guardrail you, so you don't reach the right one. So that term was on the book. It was the title of the book, but it was, if you searched guardrails, you would find literal guardrails, like construction supplies. Well, in the last 3 years, or 2 years rather, guardrails has been picked up by any mainstream media outlet talking about AI. AI needs guardrails. We need to put guardrails in AI to protect the public from. So the term guardrails has been applied to AI in the context of we need to stop people from thinking certain things. We need to block it from arriving at certain conclusions. So the way they're using guardrails is exactly the way they've put guardrails into the media. So you see what they've done here is they put guardrails in the conspiracies, in the promulgators, the limited hangout operatives. They're spreading guardrails. Well, now they're automating it. So anyway, it's just, you can just tell it's a iteration of the same system. The News Testament. Okay, I'll see if I can work the News Testament. The News Testament. I might have to write a new intro to explain it, but I'll see if I can work that into it. I like the PSYOP Entertainment Complex Exposed, but it's too long. I like Skeptic's Guide to the Theater of Psywar as a subtitle, but the main title has to have impact. I thought the deprogram sounds pretty definitive, but it might be too vague. But the News Testament, it does have some value here, because we're talking about a worldview monopoly. What do you think of religion as a holy book, especially if it has ambitions of occupying every mind in the world? So you got a holy book, and you want every single mind on earth to view the world through this as their lens. That's what I mean when I say that these things are enclosed systems. Like if it's not in my holy book, I don't need to know it. If I need to know it, it'll be in the holy book. And they all have that same approach. Well, media is a closed system in the exact same way. But what modern media has accomplished by supplanting religion is they have created a worldview that all of the competing worldview monopolies have fallen under. So every one of these that attempts to be a worldview monopoly failed. The Muslims didn't convert everybody. Christians didn't convert everybody. Scientologists haven't converted everybody, but the world stage has converted everybody. The mainstream mediated worldview has essentially become, in fact, it is our one world religion. It's our backstory. It's our News Testament. It's our future prophecies. It's got its punditry. It has all the architecture of a religion syncretically blended with science fiction. It fits every definition of a religion. It contains superstitions. It contains contemporary myths. But my point too is that it is the meta religion. It is the worldview that all the other ones fight beneath. So you might have different versions of heaven. Like, oh, well, I'm this religion, you're that religion, so you're competing. And I see it all the time. Mormons, Christians, Catholics, Jews, like Muslims, they all have different gods, different interpretations. None of them agree. They all fight over who's going to heaven, who's got the right version. Meanwhile, all of them believe in outer space. All of them cheer when the burning obelisks get richly launched into the sky. Well, that burning obelisk is is quite literally the main symbol of the religious, the earth god, but it's essentially it's a religious symbol. It's more symbol than it's more pageantry than science. But is the pageantry of the space program that has presented a more believable heaven, like space as heaven is what I'm talking about. Space as heaven, aliens as angels. They've given us an updated system that all the other systems are still compatible with. I would say COVID is a devil that the atheists will believe in, and that the virus and the pandemic model has been brought back to reintroduce the concept of sin and heresy, blasphemy. So, for example, if you look at the role of sin in the regulation of the sheeple by the priesthood, well, the virus has provided the same pretext by the same institution whose priesthood prescribed the salvation, dividing society into the saved and the unsaved. So the whole vax debate is really about who's being saved by the church of state. But moreover, it has introduced a way to regulate behavior at a way that they haven't been able to do since sin was still widely accepted to regulate behavior. It turned people into Puritans overnight. Then when it comes to the misinformation and the role of the conspiracy theorists who are rejecting the state church's doctrines, that gave them a chance to introduce the idea of heretics, of blasphemy, essentially of equating misinformation with non-canonical texts, with rejecting the church. So this division between the saved and the unsaved took form in both our mental compliance, our compliance with the doctrines of the church, and our physical submission to its sacred rites, the injectable Eucharist. I'm saying the whole thing was entirely religious, and that the alt media who took the anti position were essentially the Protestants to the mother church of MSM. And they structured it this way on purpose. They structured it this way because it's part of this ongoing dialectic. That's why, and I put this in the book, the anti section. It's not enough to be against the pro. Like, oh, I'm anti whatever they're doing. I'm anti pro. No, the anti positions are all controlled. You don't want to be on the black or the white. If you want to get off world stage, you've got to be anti pro. And my anti vax friends hate this because they want to cling to the anti. It's like, I'm sorry, but it's not a one issue thing. If you cling to one anti, you're on the world stage, and now you're aligned with those people, those believers, and those interests that support a host of other ideas. These ideas all exist as clusters, belief clusters. All right, I'm going to have to do my Uber gig. We'll continue this conversation tomorrow for Infinite Plane Saturn Day. Thanks again for the support and your patience. The PSYOP trading cards are going to escalate. They really are. It's a great project. It's going along perfectly, but it's been a little slowed, but everything else has as well. But we're going to be fixing that here very soon. So we'll be continuing this tomorrow, Infinite Plane Saturn Day.